Many Christians think they're prepared for whatever trials lie ahead, confident in their weekly church attendance and daily prayers. But what I experienced on September 17th, 2025, shattered everything I thought I knew about faith, survival, and the approaching darkness that will test every soul on earth. My name is Dr. Rachel Martinez, and until last month, I was just another career-driven scientist who had convinced herself that faith and reason were incompatible. For 20 years, I'd been working as a senior meteorologist for the National Weather Service, analyzing atmospheric patterns and predicting storms with mathematical precision. My PhD in atmospheric physics from MIT had given me the tools to understand weather systems, but it had also filled me with the arrogance of believing that everything in the universe could be explained through scientific observation and measurement. I lived alone in a sterile apartment overlooking downtown Denver, surrounded by weather monitoring equipment and computer screens that displayed satellite data from around the globe. My life was consumed by barometric pressure readings, jet stream analysis, and climate modeling. I'd published dozens of papers on extreme weather patterns and had become something of an expert on unprecedented atmospheric phenomena that seemed to be increasing in frequency and intensity over the past few years. The irony wasn't lost on me that someone who spent her career predicting natural disasters was completely unprepared for the supernatural storm that was about to engulf her life. I'd grown up attending church with my grandmother in New Mexico, but college and graduate school had systematically eroded my childhood faith until I viewed religious beliefs as primitive superstitions that humanity would eventually outgrow through scientific advancement. My work had become increasingly disturbing over the past year. Weather patterns were behaving in ways that defied conventional meteorological models. Storms were forming with impossible speed and intensity, following paths that made no atmospheric sense. Temperature variations were occurring in patterns that seemed almost deliberate, as if the atmosphere itself was being manipulated by forces beyond natural physics. The night of September 17th started with what appeared to be a routine analysis of an unusual storm system approaching the Rocky Mountains. The satellite imagery showed cloud formations that violated everything I understood about atmospheric physics. The storm was rotating in multiple directions simultaneously, displaying characteristics of both Arctic and tropical systems, while maintaining structural integrity that should have been meteorologically impossible. As I sat in my home office studying the data, something extraordinary began happening to the storm system on my computer screen. The cloud formations started shifting into patterns that looked almost like symbols, swirling configurations that reminded me of ancient script or mystical diagrams. I rubbed my eyes, assuming it was fatigue from staring at monitors for 16 hours straight, but the patterns persisted and grew more distinct. Then my chest tightened suddenly, and I couldn't breathe. It felt like the atmospheric pressure in my apartment had dropped to altitude levels that should have been impossible at ground level. I stumbled toward my phone to call for medical help, but my legs gave out, and I collapsed beside my desk where weather maps and climate data covered every available surface. The sensation was like being caught in the eye of a hurricane, surrounded by forces beyond my control or understanding. As consciousness began slipping away, I found myself thinking about my grandmother Elena, who used to tell me stories about saints and miracles while we watched thunderstorms from her front porch. "Mija," she would say in her gentle voice, "God speaks through the wind and rain to those who know how to listen. The weather is his voice calling his children home." I dismissed those words as an old woman's folklore, but lying there dying from what felt like supernatural atmospheric pressure, I whispered a prayer I hadn't spoken since childhood. The crushing sensation in my lungs vanished instantly, replaced by a peace and warmth that felt like stepping from a blizzard into perfect spring weather. A brilliant light filled my apartment, not harsh like the fluorescent bulbs I'd grown accustomed to, but golden and alive, pulsing with love so pure it made me weep for the empty years I'd spent rejecting its source. And there, standing beside my weather monitoring station, was Jesus Christ himself. I recognized him immediately, not from religious artwork, but from a recognition that went deeper than sight or science. His presence was unmistakable, radiating love that encompassed every atmospheric disturbance I'd ever analyzed, every storm I'd ever tracked, every natural phenomenon that had filled me with wonder before I'd learned to explain it away. "Rachel," he said, and his voice carried the sound of every thunderclap I'd ever recorded, every gentle rain my grandmother and I had watched together, every perfect atmospheric condition that had ever made me marvel at the complexity of creation. "Your grandmother was right about listening to my voice in the weather. You have been documenting the signs without understanding their meaning. I have chosen you to carry a message of warning and hope to my people, because the final storm is approaching." Tears streamed down my face as he continued. "Your scientific training was not a rejection of faith, but preparation for this moment. Every atmospheric anomaly you've recorded, every impossible weather pattern you've documented, has been part of the birth pangs announcing what is to come. The storms you've been tracking are not random climatic events, but supernatural signs that the age of grace is drawing to a close." Jesus gestured toward my computer screens displaying the impossible storm system, and suddenly I could see it as it truly was. The swirling clouds weren't just atmospheric disturbances, but spiritual manifestations, visible signs of the invisible war raging between heaven and hell. The weather patterns I'd been documenting were actually supernatural forces breaking through into the physical realm as the boundary between dimensions grew thinner. My apartment faded away, and I found myself standing in a place that existed between the meteorological and the mystical. Christ began revealing visions that made my soul tremble with their terrible clarity. I saw the spiritual battle raging across Earth's atmosphere, invisible to weather satellites, but devastating in its scope. Dark principalities were manipulating weather systems as weapons, using storms, droughts, and temperature extremes to create chaos that would prepare humanity to accept authoritarian control. I watched in horror as weather modification technology was being secretly deployed, not for beneficial purposes, but to create artificial disasters that would be blamed on climate change. Massive storm systems were being deliberately steered toward Christian communities and developing nations, while drought conditions were being artificially maintained in agricultural regions to create food shortages that would force populations into dependence on global distribution systems. The vision shifted to show me how atmospheric manipulation was being combined with psychological warfare. Extreme weather events were being timed to coincide with religious holidays and significant dates in biblical prophecy, creating subconscious associations that would make people lose faith in God's protection. Hurricane patterns were being altered to spell out symbols of occult significance when viewed from satellite imagery, though only those with spiritual discernment would recognize the deliberate nature of these formations. I saw similar spiritual manipulation of weather systems across every continent. In Europe, unseasonable cold snaps were being engineered to coincide with economic crises, creating desperation that made populations accept increasingly authoritarian measures. In Africa and Asia, drought and flood patterns were being artificially intensified to create massive refugee movements that would destabilize Christian nations through forced migration. "The signs have been accelerating for months," Jesus explained as I watched scenes of increasing meteorological chaos that I'd been documenting without understanding their spiritual significance. "Every unprecedented weather event you've recorded has been a warning that the final shaking is approaching. The atmosphere itself is groaning with the birth pangs of a new era. But my people have been too focused on scientific explanations to discern the spiritual realities behind these phenomena." He showed me specific dates that appeared in the vision with supernatural clarity, each one connected to atmospheric events I would be able to verify through my meteorological instruments. I saw November 8th, 2025, when 3 massive hurricane systems would form simultaneously in the Atlantic, Pacific, and Indian Oceans, an event that would be meteorologically impossible under natural conditions. These storms would converge on populated areas with timing so precise it could not be coincidental. I watched November 23rd, 2025, when atmospheric pressure readings would drop globally to levels never before recorded, creating breathing difficulties and disorientation that would be blamed on climate change, but would actually be supernatural preparation for what was coming. The pressure changes would be accompanied by electromagnetic anomalies that would disrupt satellite communications and GPS systems worldwide. But the most shocking revelation came when Jesus showed me December 15th, 2025, when the atmosphere itself would become supernaturally dense for exactly 72 hours. This wouldn't be a weather event, but a dimensional shift, as spiritual darkness would manifest physically through atmospheric pressure so intense that it would block all natural and artificial light sources. This is not a meteorological phenomenon, but a spiritual one, Jesus explained as I watched the terrifying scenes unfold. For 3 days and nights, the veil between the physical and spiritual realms will be completely removed. The atmosphere will become a conduit for supernatural forces, and every person on Earth will experience direct contact with either divine protection or demonic oppression, depending on their spiritual preparation. I saw horrifying visions of what would happen to those who had no spiritual protection. The oppressive atmospheric conditions would be accompanied by visible manifestations of evil entities, creatures that fed on fear and despair. People who had rejected faith in favor of pure materialism would find themselves completely defenseless against psychological and spiritual assaults that their scientific worldview had no framework to address. But there was incredible hope in the vision, too. I saw believers who had prepared both spiritually and practically, their homes surrounded by atmospheric conditions that remained calm and clear while chaos raged everywhere else. Their faith created actual protective barriers in the atmosphere, microenvironments where normal pressure and temperature were maintained by supernatural intervention. This is why I am giving you specific instructions, Jesus continued. There are 10 sacred items that my faithful people must gather and consecrate before the atmospheric shift begins. These are not merely physical objects, but spiritual instruments that create protective barriers in both the physical and metaphysical dimensions. The first item he revealed was consecrated olive oil, and suddenly I was transported in the vision to ancient groves where olive trees grew in soil that had been watered by the prayers of generations. I watched as this oil was used throughout biblical history to create barriers of divine protection, understanding that properly prepared oil would maintain its molecular structure even under the impossible atmospheric pressure of the coming darkness. During the 3 days, Jesus explained as I witnessed scenes of oil lamps burning steadily while hurricane-force winds raged around protected homes, lamps filled with consecrated olive oil will create stable atmospheric pressure zones that will protect believers from the supernatural weather conditions. The oil must be blessed with prayers specifically asking for atmospheric protection during the coming trial. I watched as Jesus showed me the scientific principle behind this miracle. The oil, when properly consecrated, would maintain its combustion properties even in atmospheric conditions that would normally prevent fire. The flames would burn with steady intensity, creating thermal columns that would naturally regulate air pressure and temperature in the immediate vicinity. The second item was blessed red wine, and the vision showed me how fermented grape juice created unique molecular properties that could interact with atmospheric pressure in ways that provided supernatural stabilization. I saw how wine that had been consecrated through prayer would maintain its chemical composition even under the extreme conditions of the 3 days, providing both physical nourishment and spiritual strengthening. During the darkness, Jesus explained as I watched believers finding that consecrated wine provided unusual respiratory relief during the atmospheric pressure changes. This wine will help maintain normal blood oxygen levels when the air itself becomes difficult to breathe. but it must be genuine wine that has been set apart through prayers acknowledging the blood covenant that connects all true believers. The third sacred item was unleavened bread made by hand, and the vision revealed how bread prepared according to ancient methods would maintain its nutritional properties, even when atmospheric conditions prevented normal food from providing sustenance. I understood that unleavened bread represented molecular purity that couldn't be corrupted by the supernatural atmospheric contamination. I watched believers during the 3 days discovering that this bread provided complete nourishment even when eaten in small quantities, its nutrients remaining bioavailable despite atmospheric pressure that would normally prevent proper digestion. The bread connected them to divine provision that transcended natural metabolic processes. The fourth item was consecrated salt, and Jesus revealed how salt crystals created electromagnetic barriers that could interact with the charged particles that would saturate the atmosphere during the supernatural storm. I saw how properly blessed salt scattered around buildings would create protective electromagnetic fields that would maintain normal atmospheric pressure within those boundaries. Salt conducts spiritual energy in ways that your atmospheric science doesn't yet understand, Jesus explained, as I watched salt barriers creating visible distortions in the oppressive air around protected homes. During the 3 days, blessed salt will create microscopic pressure zones that demons cannot penetrate, regardless of their attempts to manipulate atmospheric conditions. The fifth sacred item was incense made from frankincense and myrrh, and the vision showed me how these resins, when burned, would release molecular compounds that would neutralize toxic particles in the contaminated atmosphere. I understood that the smoke would create purified air pockets that would maintain breathability even when the surrounding atmosphere became virtually unbreathable. These sacred resins have properties that will counteract the atmospheric toxins that demonic forces will introduce during the 3 days, Jesus explained, as I watched believers breathing normally while surrounded by air that appeared thick and poisonous. The smoke will create protective atmospheric domes that will maintain normal oxygen levels and pressure. The sixth item was living water collected from natural springs, and the vision revealed how water from underground sources would retain its molecular purity even when surface water became contaminated by atmospheric fallout from the supernatural storm. I saw how this water would maintain its hydrating properties despite atmospheric conditions that would normally cause rapid dehydration. Springs draw from aquifers that will remain pure throughout the atmospheric disturbance, Jesus explained, as I watched believers finding that consecrated spring water provided unusual refreshment and vitality during the extreme conditions. This water will maintain its life-giving properties when all other water sources become contaminated by supernatural atmospheric pollution. The seventh item was blessed candles made from pure beeswax, and Jesus showed me how beeswax contained natural compounds that would maintain combustion even in oxygen-depleted atmospheric conditions. I watched these candles burning with steady flames that created their own microatmospheres of normal air pressure and composition. Beeswax has molecular properties that will resist the atmospheric manipulation that will occur during the 3 days, Jesus explained as I observed candles maintaining perfect flames while surrounded by air that appeared thick and oppressive. These candles will burn normally and provide both light and atmospheric purification. The eighth sacred item was blessed mirrors that had been consecrated for spiritual reflection, and the vision showed me how properly prepared mirrors would create light, refraction patterns that would confuse and repel the atmospheric entities that would manifest during the darkness. I understood that reflected light would maintain its properties despite the supernatural atmospheric density. These mirrors will redirect divine light in ways that will create protective light barriers even when natural illumination is blocked by atmospheric pressure, Jesus explained, as I watched mirrors creating complex light patterns that seemed to push back the oppressive darkness around protected homes. The ninth item was cedar wood that had been cut and blessed according to biblical patterns, and the vision revealed how cedar contained natural compounds that would resist atmospheric contamination while releasing purifying molecules into the surrounding air. I saw how burning cedar would create atmospheric purification that would maintain breathability in enclosed spaces. Cedar has antimicrobial and atmospheric purification properties that will counteract the supernatural contamination during the 3 days, Jesus explained as I watched cedar smoke, creating clear air zones around believers' homes while the surrounding atmosphere appeared thick and toxic. The 10th and final item was palm branches that had been blessed during religious celebrations, and Jesus showed me how these branches would maintain their structural integrity and life force even under atmospheric pressure that would crush normal vegetation. I understood that palm branches represented victory over atmospheric manipulation and divine authority over weather systems. These branches will maintain their life and flexibility throughout the atmospheric crisis, serving as visible declarations that divine authority supersedes all natural and supernatural weather manipulation, Jesus explained as I watched palm branches remaining fresh and green, while all other vegetation withered under the oppressive atmospheric conditions. Jesus then revealed how these 10 items would work together to create complete atmospheric protection during the supernatural storm. I watched as believers who had properly prepared these sacred objects found their homes surrounded by normal atmospheric conditions while chaos raged everywhere else. The vision showed me exactly how the atmospheric protection would function. The oil lamps and beeswax candles would create thermal columns that maintain normal air pressure. The consecrated wine would provide blood oxygenation that compensated for reduced atmospheric oxygen. The unleavened bread would supply complete nutrition despite digestive difficulties caused by pressure changes. The blessed salt would create electromagnetic barriers that maintained atmospheric stability. The frankincense and myrrh would purify contaminated air. The living water would prevent dehydration and atmospheric poisoning. The blessed mirrors would maintain light transmission. The cedar would provide atmospheric purification, and the palm branches would declare divine authority over all weather systems. But Jesus also showed me what would happen to those who attempted to use these items without genuine faith. I watched as people who treated them like scientific instruments found them completely ineffective because the protection came not from physical properties, but from spiritual covenant relationships that the items represented. The vision then revealed what would happen during the actual 3 days. I saw the atmospheric shift beginning at sunset on December 15th, 2025, as barometric pressure readings worldwide would drop to levels that should have been impossible at sea level. The air would become so dense it would be visible, appearing like thick fog that blocked all light sources while making breathing extremely difficult. I watched people who had no spiritual preparation finding themselves unable to function in the oppressive atmospheric conditions. The pressure would create disorientation and panic, while the contaminated air would cause respiratory distress and psychological breakdown. Emergency services would be completely overwhelmed and largely ineffective because their equipment wouldn't function properly under the extreme atmospheric conditions. But homes where faithful people had prepared according to Christ's instructions would maintain normal atmospheric pressure and air quality. I saw families breathing normally and functioning peacefully while surrounded by atmospheric conditions that were making their unprepared neighbors struggle for survival. The vision showed me how the 3 days would reveal the complete inadequacy of scientific materialism to address supernatural phenomena. Weather prediction models would be useless, atmospheric measurement instruments would give impossible readings, and emergency management systems would collapse because they were designed for natural rather than supernatural disasters. Jesus showed me how the atmospheric crisis would end exactly at sunrise on December 18th, 2025, with normal weather patterns returning instantly across the entire globe. Those who had endured through faith would emerge with enhanced spiritual sensitivity, able to discern supernatural influences on weather patterns that had previously been invisible to them. The vision concluded with Jesus giving me specific instructions for sharing this revelation through my professional meteorological networks. You will face ridicule from scientific colleagues who cannot accept that atmospheric phenomena might have supernatural causes, he warned. But you will also find faithful scientists and weather professionals who have been noticing unexplainable patterns and waiting for spiritual insight into what they've been observing. As the vision began to fade, Jesus spoke final words that resonated with the authority of one who commanded wind and waves. Tell my people that the atmospheric crisis is not random climate change, but deliberate supernatural preparation for my return. Those who prepare according to these instructions will be protected and will emerge as witnesses to the reality that divine authority supersedes all natural and supernatural forces that attempt to manipulate Earth's atmosphere. The brilliant light that had filled my apartment began to fade, but the certainty remained. I found myself lying beside my desk as morning sunlight streamed through windows that now seemed to frame a completely different world. My weather monitoring equipment was still displaying the impossible storm system, but now I understood its true meaning. Everything had changed. The scientific arrogance that had defined my career had been replaced by wonder and absolute certainty that I had been in the presence of the one who controls all weather systems. The atmospheric anomalies I'd been documenting for years now made perfect sense, as signs announcing the greatest supernatural event in human history. Thank you for staying with us until the end. If you're still here, it means this message touched your heart. Take a simple but powerful step. Comment your location so we can pray for your nation. Subscribe and turn on the bell to receive daily revelations, and share this video with 3 people you love. One share can guide someone back to God.